Well, it's nice to see everybody, whether you're in Odenton or Annapolis or online. Thanks for being here. My name's Aaron. I'm one of the pastors here at Bay Area Community Church, and I'm excited to be continuing in our series in Esther. This is week 2 of that series. And as we kick off this morning, I want to ask you, have you ever had someone in your life that you felt like just had it out for you? Like they had it out for you. They did not like you. Whatever was their deal with you, they were constantly making your life more difficult for no particular reason. I had a math teacher in high school who... Oh, man. So small class, right? There's only like 6 of us in this class. And I don't remember what it was. It was probably like, I was a senior, so it was probably like, I don't know, like pre-algebra or something. And anyway, I'm sitting there on the front row, and she was constantly just calling me out. Seriously, like she would make me stand up during class. That was like a thing that my teacher made me do. It was not, granted, Lauren, easy. My wife was like, you were sleeping, and that's true, okay? And, sleeping through class when there's only 6 people and you're sitting on the front row, it's not like a great life move, but I feel like the teacher just had it out for me, right? Like she was being totally unfair to make me... This example doesn't seem that good anymore. Thanks, babe. No, but regardless, I don't know if you've ever had a boss or a neighbor or a family member or whatever that you felt like they were just obsessed with making sure you were never living your best life ever. Okay. I don't know if you've ever had that, but I promise you, you have never had as much bad blood with a person as Esther and Mordecai had with the villain that we're going to meet this morning at this part of the story. Okay, the conflict between these people goes way back, like we were talking generational issues, and it sets the stage for an epic showdown. So even if you had a super mean teacher like I did, it pales in comparison to what's going to go down in today's portion of Esther. Let me review where we are in the story from last week so we can jump into what we're going to cover today. Where we left it last week, the king of Persia, his name is King Ahasuerus, or King Headache as he was nicknamed, he decided he needs to get a new queen. In comes Esther, who is a beautiful young Jewish woman who spends one night with the king. They are not discussing foreign policy, and as a result of that evening, she becomes the queen of Persia. But we have our doubts about her because she's been hiding her Jewish identity, and her secretly Jewish father figure who adopted her because she was an orphan, his name is Mordecai, he's lurking in the shadows, and he's kind of playing the puppet master behind the scenes. That's the drama of last week. That's where we left it off. And the most important principle that we learned last week is that we should never confuse God's silence with God's absence. Because throughout the book of Esther, we will find that nobody at any point is going to pray or follow the Mosaic law. In fact, God's name is not even mentioned. But you don't need to see his name in order to see his hand. Just like that video that we just watched before the message of an invisible artist drawing that wonderful graphic, we don't have to see the artist's hand to know that someone is at work behind the scenes, bringing it all together. So what's next in the story? Well, we get to meet our villain. If we were to think about the storyline, it kind of revolves around these 2 big plots, but in there we're going to meet our villain. Let's look at the first plot. It starts off in Esther chapter 2, verse 21, which says this. In those days, which are the days soon after Esther became queen, somewhere soon after, in those days, what's happening? Well, Mordecai was sitting at the king's gate. At the king's gate. What does that mean? Well, the gate is actually in this culture where official business took place. So if you're sitting there, you're some sort of an official. This is essentially like the C-suite of today. Sitting at the gate was being in the C-suite. And as he's sitting here at the table where the important people sit, something crazy happens, okay? As he's sitting here at this important place, Big Than and Teresh, which we're going to call Biggie and Terry, these 2 guys, 2 of the king's eunuchs, they guarded the threshold, okay? Biggie and Terry, these are bodyguards. They became angry, and they sought to lay hands on King Headache. And lay hands, we're not talking like lay hands and pray on him. They're trying to do violence to this man. They're trying to kill King Artaxerxes. I'm sorry. Xerxes. Artaxerxes, father. It gets confusing. Doesn't matter. Let's go with Headache, okay? They're trying to kill King Headache. This would be like 2 Secret Service agents deciding that they want to assassinate the president. Okay, this is not good. But Biggie and Terry, it turns out, are kind of sloppy with their tradecraft because apparently Mordecai finds out about this plot that they're going to try to kill the king, And so he tells Esther, because he's got a connection with the queen, he tells Esther, Esther tells the king, and the king has Biggie and Terry executed. And so Mordecai is standing there and he must be feeling pretty good about this, right? I mean, he just saved the king's life. And what's even better is he gets official credit for it. If we read this, it says the incident was recorded in the book of the Chronicles in the presence of the king. Let the record now officially show Mordecai is the guy responsible for saving the king's life. This is a perfect scenario for him, okay? If I am Mordecai, I'm just going to chill in my office and kick my feet up on my desk and just wait for the promotion or the medal or the bridge that's going to be named after me or something, right? I'm going to just save the king's life. And wouldn't you know it, the next chapter opens with someone getting a big promotion from the king. Esther chapter 3, verse 1, it says, after these things, which things? The things that just happened where he saved the king's life. After these things, King Headache promoted. Who's he going to promote? It's got to be Mordecai, right? Who is it? Haman, the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, which, by the way, that name on the playground had to have been brutal. Hammedatha. Anyway, so the son of Hammedatha, and advanced him and set him on his throne above all the officials. Who is this guy, right? And why is he stealing Mordecai's promotion? Well, based on the fact that Haman is called an Agagite, the original audience would have immediately known this dude is the big bad villain, okay? We have just been introduced in the storyline. We're past the first plot. We're meeting the villain. It would have been impossible for them to miss this title, an Agagite. And the fact that it was used would mean that he has bad blood with Jewish people for generations, but we miss it completely, of course. So let me give you some quick backstory so we can be caught up to what they would have immediately known. Let's look back at how Mordecai was introduced. This is very important from the last chapter. Mordecai, that's his name. He's the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. He's the son of Kish, a Benjamite. What's this about? Well, Kish is the father of Israel's first king. His name is Saul. Okay, so Mordecai is introduced in the story as a descendant of a king, which seems like it would be pretty important, and it turns out it is. So we find out that this descendant of King Saul, who is not getting a promotion that he deserves, and the person who does get the promotion is introduced this way. After these things, it's Haman, the Agagite. And the mixing of a son of Kish and an Agagite would have produced an audible gasp in the first audience, okay? Seriously, all polite women across the room would have been fainting with their kerchiefs across their face, and the orchestra would have been dun, dun, dun. You know what I mean? That's the moment. When they saw Agagite, in fact, we can practice this right now. When I'm going to read Agagite, you guys can give me this audible gasp that I've been hoping for. Maybe we can have somebody pass out. We've got medical personnel. So Haman, the Agagite. Oh, that felt good. I mean, I feel powerful. Okay, none of this was in the script. So, the son of Kish and an Agagite are on the same story now. These are mortal enemies. There is an unresolvable conflict between these two groups of people. This would be like hearing today about a promotion being stolen from a Capulet by a Montague. Okay? Or from a Hatfield by a McCoy, or from a Red Sox fan by a Yankees fan. Okay? There is an ancient tension between the forces of good and evil in these two groups. And it would have ratcheted the tension absolutely to 11. Why is it that they don't like each other so much? Well, the conflict. If we're to give the history, you know I want to. So the conflict is between the Amalekites and the Israelites. And this goes all the way back to the story of the Exodus. Right after Israel is coming out of slavery, they're weak, they're vulnerable, they're not at all ready to fight anybody. And as they're getting close to the promised land, they are ambushed by the Amalekites. They sweep in and they try to attack them. It's a famous battle, if you're familiar with it, where Moses has to keep his hands up high and people hold his hands up so that they end up winning this battle. But the Amalekites in this story, they are not completely destroyed, though they are defeated. And God promises then and there in Exodus 17, here's what he says. The Lord said to Moses, write this as a memorial in a book. Let the record show, recite it in the ears of the next leader, Joshua. I will utterly blot out the memory of Amalek from under heaven. You don't want God to say this about you, okay? This is not good for the Amalekites. But if we fast forward to when Israel has finally gone into the land with Joshua, they've conquered the land, the Amalekites never quite get fully destroyed. Israel can't seem to get the job done. So if we fast forward again to the time of Saul, the son of Kish, the first king of Israel, he gets a chance to finally wipe out the Amalekites. But he doesn't do it. He spares some of them, including the king of the Amalekites, whose name is Agag. Agag, king of the Amalekites. And Saul's disobedience in not wiping out the Amalekites when he had the chance and sparing King Agag, it is the reason that Saul is removed from the kingship of Israel. There is a centuries-old conflict between Amalekites and Israelites. It goes down in history as being between the son of Kish and Agag. In this moment, it becomes so significant, again, that calling someone an Agagite would mean that they have a history of violence and hatred against the Jews. In a modern context, it might be like a Jewish person calling someone a Nazi. It would have that level of import. So if we come back to Esther, where we have a son of Kish, Mordecai, who has just had a promotion stolen by an Agagite, Haman, gasp, right? We cue the dramatic lighting, right? This just got intense. It's about to go down. The question is when, not if. We now have the conflict. When will the battle begin? It begins in the very next verse after he's introduced. Verse 2. All the king's servants who were at the king's gate, that's where Mordecai hangs out, right? All these officials, they bowed down and paid homage to Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. All the official people, they've been commanded to bow down to Haman. I don't know what that says about his leadership, that it has to be a command, but the point is, they have to bow. How do you think that's going to go for a son of Kish with an Agagite? It's not going to go well. What happens? Mordecai did not bow down or pay homage. There's no way, there is no how that a son of Kish is going to bow to an Agagite. So this goes on for a little bit, and all the other officials, they're confused because they don't know that Mordecai's Jewish, and they're like, bro, why aren't you bowing? This is going to be a problem. Eventually, Mordecai comes clean to them. He reveals his lineage, that he is Jewish, and the rest of the officials immediately flip on him and go straight to Haman, which is so grimy of them, but that's what they do. And they're all like, hey, Mordecai won't bow to you. And side note, it's because he's Jewish. That doesn't go well either. Haman is not excited about this. What happens? Well, when Haman saw that Mordecai didn't do the thing he was supposed to do, and that it turns out he's a son of Kish, Haman was filled with fury. Again, this is resurrecting an absolutely generational issue. But Haman's the guy in charge, and he can punish Mordecai. But instead of just punishing Mordecai for breaking the law, like it was law that he bowed and he didn't do it, so instead of just punishing him, what does Haman do? Well, he does what any self-respecting, narcissistic, homicidal maniac would do. He presses the genocide button. Okay, look what he does. He disdained to lay hands on Mordecai alone. Yeah, don't punish the one guy that's the problem. Instead, Haman sought to destroy all the Jews, the people of Mordecai, throughout the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus. He has to exterminate the entire people group of the entire empire. This is insane. Okay, the guy is totally off of his rocker. And it becomes, for the rest of the book, this is the main conflict that needs to be resolved. Israel has just become the main target of the king's most powerful official. And so he sets about getting his genocide approved by the king. And that's where we get plot number 2. Beginning, plot number 2. How's he going to do it? How's he going to pull off his plan? Well, What he comes up with is actually brilliant. It's a conniving plan. And he pitches it to the king. We'll look at it together, starting in verse 8 of chapter 3. Haman said to King Ahasuerus, "There is a certain people, very specific, a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the peoples in all the provinces of your kingdom." Again, he does not even name who they are directly. There's just a certain group of people. And what's the problem with these mystery unidentified people? Well, here's what he says. Their laws are different from those of every other people. That's fair. And they don't keep the king's laws. That's not really fair. So that it is not to the king's profit to tolerate them. That's just totally untrue. He mixes lies with half-truths to make it seem like his plan is going to be in the king's best interest, which is probably a good way to pitch something to your boss. But what he's trying to do here is get his plan approved. Because right now, this seems clever. It seems quite reasonable instead of homicidally insane, which is what it actually is. And so his request is, verse 9, "If it please the king." Well, what could I do for you, good sir? Well, if it pleases the king, let it be decreed that they, all of them, everywhere, be destroyed. Like all of them? This is crazy. The fact that the king doesn't even flinch at this request, even though he doesn't even know who they're talking about, tells you how crazy Xerxes is too. But just in case this argument that he's laying out was not compelling enough to the king, he lands the plane with this part of the pitch: "Let them be destroyed, and I will pay you 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who have charge of the king's business." There it is. It's all about the Benjamins. Haman knows how this gets done. He greases the skids with a huge bribe, and Xerxes approves the plan. Here's what it says. This is crazy. "The king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman the Agagite, the son of Hammedatha, the enemy of the Jews." Handing him this ring is like handing him a blank check, literally. He's saying, "You write it. I don't even need to see it. I approve. Whatever you want to do, just sign it with my ring. I'm good." Israel has just been sold out, literally, by Xerxes. The decree that Haman actually ends up writing, giving the logistics of how to destroy the Jewish people, is terrifyingly brilliant. What he does is he crowdsources the genocide. He crowdsources it. His letter basically says, like, "Attention, all Persian citizens, if I could have your attention here, on this particular date, which I've established in the future, please kill all Jewish men, women, and children. And when you're done killing them, you can have all of their stuff. Thank you, and have a nice day." He declares like a murder is okay day and releases the people themselves to kill the Jewish people, motivating them with the promise of wealth. This is ruthless, but effective. And the chapter ends this way, that the couriers went out hurriedly, that they're carrying the message to all of the kingdom of what they're supposed to do. They went out hurriedly, and the king and Haman sat down to drink. They're having a quick nightcap after ordering the death of thousands, potentially millions of people. Haman, the Agagite, looks like he has won. The Amalekites will finally have their vengeance on the Israelites, the son of Kish. And the Israelites, when they get this message, they respond exactly the way you'd think they would. They go into public mourning and despair. This is not a representative democracy or a republic. They can't talk to their representative or cast a vote. This is just a law that exists now that they have to deal with. So they begin to embrace the inevitability of their fate. This is about 11 months away, and that means the wedding that you've got planned for next year, you don't have that plan anymore. The woman who's pregnant right now will never see the first birthday of her child. The hope and the future that they have desired is gone. They're all going to die at the hands of their neighbors and coworkers. This is a dark moment for Israel. Thankfully, there's a response. We have plot number 2. Haman lays it out, but then we have the response. This is where we re-enter Esther and Mordecai into the story. As this story, this moment with Haman is going down, it's been about 5 years that Esther has been the queen. She has maintained through those years her secretive Jewish status. And at first, somehow, she doesn't seem to know about the decree being sent out. She hears, though, that Mordecai is publicly mourning in sort of an embarrassing way. And she's like, yikes, what's going on with Mordecai? So she gets her assistant and sends him down to talk to Mordecai to figure out what's wrong. And Mordecai just unloads on this guy. He tells the guy about the decree. He tells him about the bribe that the king has paid. Somehow he knows about that. And then he tells the assistant, hey, look, go back to Esther, tell her all this stuff, and then tell her, go to the king and get this stopped. Go to the king and get this stopped. Mordecai doesn't just update Esther. He says, go fix it. Esther hears this, and she starts freaking out, understandably. She's like, I can't go to the king. There's a law in place that if you approach the king and you haven't been summoned by the king, then you're going to be immediately killed. And she's like, not only have I not been summoned to discuss the changing of a law that he just made, he actually hasn't summoned me in over 30 days, like a month. That is not a great sign for the condition of their marriage at this point. They haven't even seen each other in a month. She's like, I'm going to die if I approach the king. And Mordecai fires back to her, all via the assistant, with something really interesting. Let's look at this. This is chapter 4, starting in verse 13. He says, do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. Okay, he straight up calls her out in this moment. He's like, you think you're going to skate through this situation, but you're not. That's a little confusing, though, because remember, at this point, her Jewishness is still a very carefully guarded secret. But apparently, Mordecai is confident that by the time this death date comes, her secret will no longer be a secret. Why is that? Well, it could be because of him doxing her, or it could be because of someone else. We don't know, but it definitely has the feeling of being a veiled threat. He's like, you're going to die either way. And the next thing he says is as close as this book gets to acknowledging God in any way. He says, if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. He's vague about where, but you and your father's house will perish. Mordecai, again, sort of oddly, has this confidence that at least a remnant of the Jewish people will make it through this ordeal, that somewhere from somehow, someplace, help will arise. But Esther will not be in the group of people who is saved, and neither will Mordecai. So he's saying this is not going to end well for us, though some people will live. But then he lands his pitch with the most famous words of the book of Esther, words that transform the course of Esther's life, that transform her into the woman of courage that history remembers her to be. He says, and who knows, whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this. Who knows? He says, who knows? Maybe, just maybe, you're not the queen by accident. Maybe, just maybe, I'm not an official at the gate of the king on accident. Maybe, just maybe, Esther wasn't born a beautiful woman in the city of Susa, selected to be queen with a secret Jewish identity under a very manipulatable king. Maybe, just maybe, that isn't all an accident. Maybe it was part of a larger plan to save the people of Israel for such a time as this. And boom, in this moment, the lights come on for Esther. From here on out, for the rest of the story, Esther doesn't take a single order from anybody, least of all Mordecai. She switches into queen mode, and it lands her in the history books as a woman of great courage. I love how she responds. She just starts taking charge. She's taking names. She's like, okay, assistant, go tell him this. Here's what you need to know. Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa and hold a fast on my behalf. Interestingly, this is a fast, not prayer, just a fast. So again, it's not quite as spiritual as we'd like it to be, but she holds that everybody should be not eating on my behalf. Then I will go to the king. Though it is against the law, I recognize that. I know the danger. I'm fully aware of what I'm doing. And if I perish, I perish. She wants their solidarity in fasting for her. And she says, I'll do it. If I die, I die. And there we have the woman we've been waiting for. Right? That characteristic courage of the people of Israel who have been in exile, like the leaders before her who have done the same thing, said the same lines. She has come to a place where her own life is less important than honoring her calling. In this moment, she's willing to do what God has called her to do. Her back is against the wall, but she will not go down without a fight. And as the story plays out, she will employ all of the charm and savvy and political skills that she has demonstrated. She will use those all to save or attempt to save her people. And I'd say, good luck stopping Esther now. Mordecai, on the other hand, verse 16, he just says, Mordecai went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. Yes, ma'am. And he gets to work, following the orders of his queen. No longer merely his adopted daughter. She is Her Majesty. And next week, we'll find out how it all turns out. For now, let's look at some principles. You can take a deep breath. I won't ask you to gasp any longer, okay? The principles, I hope that we can reflect on these from this portion of the story that will help us better understand what this might mean for us. The first principle would be this, that God places his people. God places his people. What do I mean? Well, think with me for a second about the timeline here. Esther and Mordecai, they are in their respective places before Haman ever even enters the story, right? Esther is a secretly Jewish queen of Persia and has been for a while, and Mordecai is a palace official who has a massive official IOU from the king. All of that is true before we even know Haman's name. Haman doesn't even have the promotion to use his position in order to put down the Jewish people. He doesn't even have any of that yet. And God has already worked behind the scenes and in advance to place his people precisely where they need to be. Esther is not able to fully carry out the role she's going to carry out had she not had Mordecai on the outside. And Mordecai is not able to play, he would have had no significant role to play in saving the Jewish people if Esther is not already in place. It takes both of them in advance to be where they need to be. God has placed his people. Yet, God has placed his people despite the fact that both Mordecai and Esther have at least a little bit, or possibly a lot of bit, compromised to get to the place where they are. God has transformed their bad behavior into a perfect strategy. So let me ask you something. Do you think it is possible that God has also placed us where we are, and that placement is on purpose, regardless of how we got here? Your job. What if it's not an accident? What if your neighbors are not an accident? What about your platform or your promotion? What if they're not an accident? You are where you are for a reason. Of course, this doesn't mean you could never move or you could never get a promotion, but it means that you have been placed in this moment, and this moment isn't a moment that you want to miss. It's on purpose. I love this quote from Charles Spurgeon. His series of sermons on Esther is amazing. I recommend them. He says this: every child of God is where God has placed him for some purpose. So ask, inquire, for what practical purpose has God placed each one of you where you are now? You've been wishing for another position where you could do something for Jesus? Don't wish anything of the kind. Serve him where you are. If you're sitting at the king's gate, there's something for you to do there. And if you're on the queen's throne, there would be something for you to do there. Do not ask either to be the gatekeeper or to be the queen, but whichever you are, serve God therein. When we begin to see our lives as intricately woven tapestries of God's sovereign purpose, we'll not only develop a contentedness in our current situation, but deep drive and a motivation to seek out his purpose in our placement. And then we'll fulfill it to the best of our ability. Let me ask, how actively do we look for God's purposes in where he has you today? Okay, at work, do I see work as a purposeful place which God has sovereignly ordained that I would be there, at that desk? Do I see it that way, or am I just hanging on till the weekend or till retirement? At home, moms or dads, do we embrace God's purpose of training children up, or am I looking for the day when I can finally just care about myself? There are endless versions of this question that we could ask about whatever stage of life you're in or whatever situation you find yourself going through. But are we asking these questions? Am I seeking out what purpose might God have in this placement? God places us. But just because God places his people doesn't guarantee their obedient participation. And that's where we get to the second principle, our final one. God places his people, but often he uses that placement to test his people. Because of our sinful hearts, and because we have an enemy that loves to try and thwart God's plans, our placement and God's purposes almost always come up against Haman the Agagite. Some kind of a powerful move by the enemy or our own sinful desires that want to overcome God's work in the world and in our hearts. And what that means is that opportunities for obedient faith will almost always collide with an opposition with pressure to cave or to become apathetic or to compromise our values. And God is allowing these challenges for our obedient faith to get tangled up with the opposition so that they will function as a test about our true loyalties. For Esther and for Mordecai, given their positions, given Haman's edict, they were experiencing a test of faith, and our lives are not substantially different. We are also presented with tests of faith. And of course, the future fate of the people of God might not hang in the balance like it did for them. But it is a test. And here at Bay Area, we say that one of our values is great faith. And this kind of obedience, where you obey that even though it has an uncertain outcome, it requires great faith, huge portions of great faith. Because faith is what motivates obedience to actually live out the purpose to which God has placed us in this moment. And the reason I think that we need faith to obey is because this sort of obedience is almost always costly. Almost always. But your current placement, my current placement, and whatever comforts it affords us, whatever power or leverage our current placement affords us, it's an opportunity that was afforded to you so that you would leverage those power or positions or comforts for God's purpose in the world. A lack of willingness to leverage your moment or power or position, despite the fact that God gave it to you for that purpose, an unwillingness to do that reveals that perhaps that gift has taken a place in your life that it was never meant to take. I mean, we see this dynamic with Esther, right? She's the queen. Her life at that time as queen, she has access to power and comfort that she certainly did not have beforehand. And in approaching the king, all of that is on the line. And I love how Tim Keller says this. Tim Keller, who passed away this week after a life full of very, very fruitful, meaningful ministry. His series of sermons on Esther is also great. He says this: if you're unwilling to risk your place in the palace, whatever your palace, your place is. If you're unwilling to risk it, it's eaten you. Mordecai is saying to Esther, if you can't risk throwing away the palace for others, namely your people, the palace has devoured you. Has it devoured us in our positions? God is testing us, and it's not some divine pass-fail quiz about whether or not he loves you. Just trying to help us see that our lives are an opportunity. Your positions are an opportunity that are not to be missed. So will we fulfill the role that God has orchestrated for us? Will we do that together as a spiritual family? But maybe you're here and you might be discouraged because you're like, look, the position that I have is a lot like Esther's in that I'm a fraud. I got here a bit because I'm a faker, because I'm a compromiser, because I sold out at some point in this process, and it actually helped me in my career, but I don't like the bodies that are behind my trail of success. God couldn't use me. But the fact is, that's simply not true. God isn't limited to using perfect people. You don't have to have always maximized every opportunity in your past to make the most of the opportunity in the present. God tests his people. He gives them a chance for great faith. Will we say with Esther, if I perish, I perish? Because who knows? Who knows? Maybe God has placed us here with this church family, with those neighbors, under this government, with that boss, this job, those kids. Maybe, just maybe, all of that was for such a time as this. Let me pray. Father, help us to leverage the purpose in your placement. May we obediently take steps of great faith, though at this point in the story we don't know how it turns out, and neither did Esther and Mordecai. Give us faith to obey. Give us eyes to see something greater than our circumstances, and instead, your sovereign hand. Faith is in Christ's name. Amen. Hey, so in an effort to be better together, today we've got some snacks for all of us to eat together, okay? So a couple of pieces of instructions. There are delicious snacks of some kind. They are lovely and delicious for such a time as this. Please get your children for such a time as this, namely immediately. And then, when you go get the snacks, here's the question you're asking: where are you serving this summer? Go to somebody you don't know and ask them, what's your name? Where are you serving this summer? All right? Go enjoy your snacks better together. See you guys next week.